We'll go ahead then and restart our deliberative process. I guess I would like to say, especially to my new friend, Ms. Sanchez, who specifically mentioned in her testimony that she hoped we would hear her comments, even though she may have been a little late to the game. And I think I can assure you that we did hear your comments. And everybody else's as well, but specifically. Okay, you want to start with this blue type? Is that something we could start with, or?
Make the font bigger.
You can blow it up. It's my favorite request. Mr. Chairman, so I guess this is proposed language to specifically address the opportunity for operators to have additional time to comply with the existing facility requirements in subparts B, C, and D. So I think it's consistent with Ms. Jost's request, but just configured slightly differently as a add-on new subpart E, specifically addressing an opportunity to request a different effective date by filing a request before February 1, 2016.
In addition to Ms. Jost, Trout Unlimited also had some concerns here, I think, relative.
B, C, and D, I think it's all three. That's what's written right up there. Yes, Trout. So I had a sidebar with Mr. Cross from Trout Unlimited. What I would anticipate is that staff would issue either a notice to operators or a guidance document related to this variance to capture some of the Trout Unlimited ideas, the risk-based analysis concepts that Commissioners Craig and Allward have raised. So to give operators some idea of what we would expect to see in that request, and which would give them a higher likelihood of success.
And that's something you can do without putting a list in the rules. That's something you can do.
I think so. You start putting lists and rules, you get into problems about inclusion and exclusion, and what does it mean if it's not there, and like, so yeah, I think we can just make that a dialogue.
Any commissioners have any heartburn over this proposed addition?
No heartburn, just I do think the risk-based nature of the plan is important, and that perhaps it should be included in the statement of basis and purpose so that operators have some insight as to what they're being asked for. I know you were in a more important conversation.
Sorry.
But
I apologize, Chairman.
No,
Commissioner, you'll have to repeat it.
No problem. I just was thinking that perhaps some of these ideas that were tossed about, like that it should be a risk-based plan and stuff, could be within the statement of basis and purpose, so that operators and other parties have an understanding of what ought to go into a plan that's likely to get approval.
I think that's a fine suggestion, especially because I'm not going to write it.
Okay, any other items in the proposed rule anyone wishes, any of you commissioners wish to address?
Chairman?
Commissioner Hawkins?
I have some concerns over some of the low volume wells, and we've heard from the industry today that they don't think that those wells might be able to economically support a retrofit, stripper wells. We've also heard from the royalty owners associations about continued production from those wells for the property owners. So I'm just wondering, we don't really have a definition of low volume or stripper wells in our rules, but it might be something to consider to provide an exemption for low volume wells. I think when we look at our risk-based approach, they're not high pressure, high volume, they're fairly low risk well.
Is that Commissioner Walk?
Maybe a question as it relates to that. Aren't we still concerned about the equipment hazard itself and not just the hydrocarbon hazard?
I believe that the director made some comment relative to that.
Again, the fact that it's low volume doesn't mean there's not a lot of product sitting in the tanks at any given time. Candidly, well, first I should back up, Commissioner. There is a definition for what constitutes a stripper well for purposes of severance tax, because those wells are exempt from the tax. I'd have to look and see whether that's an apt definition. I think it would be. It's a volumetric type of definition. I don't know if anybody on staff knows that off the top of their head. I cannot. Commissioner King is suggesting perhaps 15 barrels a day. I can't be sure. We can find that.
I don't know what that is either, but if there is some mechanism that we could identify those lower productivity, marginally economic wells, that maybe there's some benefit to exempting those from retrofitting just to prevent waste.
If I may, I'd like to respond to that substantively. I have to express this concern. Many of those kinds of wells are operated by smaller companies with smaller staffs. We heard from a representative of one such company today, and this is a new form of protest for me. I take Mr. Engby's comments very much seriously, very seriously. But these are smaller companies with smaller staffs, and I guess I would consider that in some ways a risk factor in and of its own right. So in my estimation, I guess I think what we're trying to do by the variance that we've just proposed is allow for consideration of some of those on a case-by-case kind of basis. And again, honestly, I would expect to see some hard data if you're saying to me, this is going to hurt my economics, in this kind of a way. That you're asking us as the state to forego what we think are reasonable protections, notwithstanding Mr. Ingvy's opinion to the contrary. These are things that we think add value. I really am not interested in rules for the sake of rules, never have been. So I'll stop.
Well, I appreciate your clarification, because I feel like that what we've added in terms of a variance provides maybe some relief from the effective date of going in and retrofitting, and maybe that's appropriate, that it's just delayed based on till economics are better for those wells. Product prices improve.
Thank you, Commissioner Hawkins. As I indicated earlier, that's one of my concerns as well.
Mr. Chair.
I was trying to come up with a middle-of-the-road solution without simply totally exempting them, but somehow easing the burden of of complying with the retrofitting. I thought, well, maybe we could at least not require the remote shut-in.
The remote shut-in is not required. Remote shut-in is not a required retrofit.
Thank you.
So, Mr. Chair?
I got that then.
You won that one.
Uh,
So, thank you, Mr. Chair. One of the things is, you know, I'm looking at the potential costs and thinking about a smaller operator, and having tanks anchored is already one of our rules. And I would think that in some cases that anchoring system already meets the more stringent requirements, just because somebody over-engineered something or whatever, that they're going to hold the tanks down. And so I think that could be part of a plan too. If an operator can't get to the steel ring berm, to document that they've got the anchoring system in place, and that then some compliance plan that may meet the spirit of what that berm would do would probably satisfy a lot of the parties involved. And so the anchoring's already a rule, and that they're not supposed to be able to float away based under our current rules. So document that that's in place, and I would support staff's saying that's meeting the spirit, and let's work down the line as to how we have to do anything else, especially if it's an economic issue for a smaller operator.
What do you think, Director? Commissioner Walker?
Mr. Chair, given the prolonged silence, may I move staff's recommended rule with letter E as an addition?
You certainly may.
Second.
The entire rule with this amended language. We have a motion and a second. Is there any further discussion?
Mr. Chair, if I may.
Yes, sir.
I think the staff's suggested rules take us a significant way towards protecting from future floods, and that may be of greater or lesser magnitude than what we've most recently experienced. I think as always, there's room for improvements, and I expect that those improvements will be forthcoming over the years, whether it's additions or subtractions or other modifications. I think this is a good step in the right direction, and so I think I can support this rule, especially with the additional language in E.
Mr. Chairman,
Commissioner Holden?
I would support 603H1, A, B, and C, and 2, B, and D. And I think we need to change from a steel berm to flood protection devices or something along those lines, because it's for debris instead of a berm, because we're not going to contain anything. We've already discussed that most of the berm is going to be overtopped. Just to be more specific about it.
Okay.
The difference between a berm and flood protection.
So 2 questions, if I may, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir.
Commissioner Holton, tell me again, so is H1, are we okay with, or?
I'm okay with that.
Okay, so it's just number 2.
Number 2, I'm okay with B and D and E. And I go back to the discussion that we had with Commissioner Kirkmeyer, where we've had almost 3,000 wells permitted in the last 2 years in Weld County, And Weld County probably has a bigger chance of getting flooded next year than any other county in the Front Range because all the rivers come into that county. And if we've got that problem there and Commissioner Kirkmeyer didn't have a problem with it, why would Boulder have any problem with it when they haven't had one in the last 3 years?
Okay, and just, if I may again, Part A, the inventory, you're not okay with that?
Oh, no, I am okay with that.
Okay, so it's C, it's the berms, and with that clarification, I'll just respond in this regard. So the term containment berm, I believe, is what's in the current rules, and we refer to containment berms as those things which can contain the contents of the tank. So we're not worried about containing the flood in any way, shape, or form. Right? So there's that, and we have requirements for containment berms now. They just don't have to be made of steel rings. So where you want to go with it is protecting against debris, and you used a term that I didn't hear or understand.
Yeah, if it's going to be for flood protection from the debris, then I'm fine with that.
And what would you call that? There is a term that I can't think of, like bumpers or
We had something.
bullocks, something close to that. What are those called? Bollards.
Something that deflects the debris.
Right.
Like I say, in Weld, we don't let them put in, when they're in the floodway or the floodplain, we don't let them put in chain link fences because it hangs all the debris up and causes problems down the river.
Right.
So my biggest thing in this whole deal is get that stuff anchored so that it doesn't move.
Wasn't there something in the flood lessons learned report that suggested some sort of, deflector shields upstream, for lack of a scientific term?
Well, there is, and I guess again, Commissioner, is something like that. Is the premise here that that's less expensive and therefore okay compared to the steel berms?
Yeah, because it's not going to go all the way around it.
Okay.
I mean, that way they could still use an earth berm for containment of the tank itself, but when it overtops, it's not going to make any difference anyway. But even taking two pieces of guardrail and putting them at a point where the flood is going to come from, it'll deflect that debris away from the site.
I want to remember, and I want to follow up on what you're saying to see if I understand. Part of the reason for the steel containment tanks was, did the earthen berms were undermined and thus led to tank slippage and pipe breaks and stuff because they weren't reinforced and allowed for not just debris but also water undermining the foundations
Well,
of
I
the
think
tanks.
that's where the anchoring comes in.
And if that does accomplish that, then I think that steel berms or other effective device to be identified.
You're saying as long as you have anchoring and, for lack of a better word, bumpers, you don't need, even if the berm goes away, that ought to be sufficient. Sufficient anchoring.
Then when the floodwaters
Cheaper.
go away, then you come back and put in your earthen berm again for containment.
Cheaper.
Okay, I wasn't sure if you were proposing an amendment to the motion.
Actually, just discussion to see where the rest of the commissioners are.
I think we should wait till this discussion is done over there.
So can I just ask a question while they're chatting? So you don't think the last part of that where it says, or another engineered technology that provides equivalent protection from floodwaters covers that? Because it's not prescribing the steel ring or a particular type of berm. It's just saying, or another engineered technology that provides equivalent protection from floodwater.
Well, the only bad thing is it kind of conflicts with 1C. It says it's got to be mechanically connected to the steel ring.
I am a, oh, one. Or the engineered equivalent.
Depends on where you think the or the engineer equivalents. I didn't think, yeah.
But you're still talking about containment. You're not talking about what we're trying to accomplish.
See, is the engineered equivalent connected to the steel ring? You're reading it as an entirely separate alternative to having.
Yeah,
No, I get that, but it still says containment in there. So where I live, my family
Yeah.
farm, the water will get 6 feet. So you're completely over top the containment area.
So perhaps instead, so that we need a, so one of the things is they've got to build containment berms.
Yeah.
And if they have a containment berm, it needs to be steel, or, and so what we, may be constructed of steel rings, comma, or some other engineered technology in place that provides equivalent protection from floodwaters. So that they're two separate potential devices, is what you're trying to get at, right?
Yeah.
If I may, I like that because technology changes and steel berm may be obsolete. I think Commissioner Holton's concept could be captured in this other engineered technology language, as Dr. Walk, Commissioner Walk has pointed out.
So may I ask a follow-up in that vein? If the language from 2C that says another engineered technology that provides equivalent protection, if we take that language and move verbatim up into 1C, does that help? Does that clear up Commissioner Holton's concern? After mechanically connected to the steel ring, comma, or another engineered technology that provides equivalent protection from floodways.
The 2C language
Floodwaters.
goes up to 1C.
Floodwater.
In both places.
I would add the word debris, because that's what we're trying to accomplish.
The thing we can't lose sight of is that the main function of the containment is to contain spills.
Right.
I think in Commission, if I may, Mr. Chairman, if I understand Commissioner Holton's comment or concern, it's that I don't think there was a, well, the 6 foot, 2 foot example is really where, I mean, in the biblical flood, it may not contain, but it may still provide the benefits of structural protection from destructive debris. Ideally, we get both.
Agreed.
But is that, I'm making sure I understand.
It was also the steel berm provided erosion protection so they wouldn't get undercut. That was the big part of the steel berm, not so much what was above the ground, but also that it was
Sunk in.
pulled into the ground and kept those tanks from and the concrete pad from being completely undercut, and then having them list, and then more problems come from that.
Could you discuss that enough to offer an amendment?
Sounds like
Yeah, come up with, you had language.
So maybe if I can get a scribe, maybe we've got it up there. Yeah, so 1C reads, another engineered technology that provides equivalent protection from flood waters or debris and debris. I think staff is canoodling on, I think they want it to be and. I think I'm being filmed. So the language in 1C mirrors 2C, and I think it does allow an operator to do something that provides protection. I guess my only point is they will still be required to have spill containment under different rules.
Yes.
And if what they want to do to protect the equipment from flood damage is a guardrail, they have that opportunity.
But that's not going to address the undercutting problem that you just described.
I tend to agree with you.
Yeah, because it should redirect the water.
May add turbulence.
Okay. More discussion on that or offer an amendment?
You made the motion. You have a motion.
Well, I accept the amendment to
Well-
the original motion, but I'm not sure we're done yet.
Who made the motion to amend?
There has not been one formal.
Nobody here as well.
There isn't one.
Okay. That's what I was waiting for.
I got one more. Under the definitions, I have a problem with the definition. We've had a lot of discussion about local government being able to designate their own 100-year marks, floodways, floodplains. So who's really going to decide that? Is that going to be FEMA from a FEMA map? Are we going to have to go to every municipality and every local government to get their own map? I mean, I don't understand where we're going to go with that. And do we have an overlay on our GIS system here? We can at least get the basics from FEMA.
I'm going to ask Mr. Coleman to address that.
Thank you, Commissioner. So there's the issue we have. I mean, FEMA will have a lot of what, as I said in my testimony, FEMA will have a lot of it mapped. They will not have it all of it mapped. So our intention is through the 2A process that information will need to be provided to us on where they made their determination on whether it was a floodplain or not. We're going to add a checkbox that says, is it in a floodplain or not? And then where did you make that determination? What sources did you use? And the way we have it proposed, is that yes, they're going to have to look at 4 different sources: the county they're in, the municipality, if they're in a municipality, state, and FEMA. FEMA will be pretty static and pretty well known. I believe the state could potentially be decently known. It could be a wild card on the county and the municipality, depending on which county and which municipality they're in. We originally had this rule to say FEMA, flat out just FEMA. But we learned that FEMA takes a while to map, so we struggled with the concept of just saying FEMA, because if a county or municipality or even the state had another area that was considered a floodplain, was that really fair? And that's why that's the reasoning we have the definition like that. Maybe there's a better suggestion, but that's the reasoning for staff's
So
proposal.
we're going to leave it up to the operators?
Well, we will have
Or is it gonna be up to the LGD? Because I'm sure Boulder's got some places that are mapped. I know Greeley does. Weld County's been doing their own mapping up and down the Platte here over the last 5 years. So is it going to be the operators, LGD? How are we going to do that?
So the operator will be the one that submit the application, and ultimately they're going to have to do some analysis prior to submitting it. Our OGLAs will review the 2A. LGDs, as Mr. Delonro said earlier, can comment, and if they feel that the operators said it wasn't in a floodplain, but they said, yes, we have a mapped floodplain, it is very imperative, as Greg said, that they make a comment on the 2A saying, hey, we disagree. They said it's not in a floodplain. Here is our map, and this is why we think it is in a floodplain, because here's our map. So yeah, it would be working together between local government operator and COGCC's OGLA staff.
Who would ultimately make the decision? I mean, because some of the local governments are way over and above the state. And the state's over and above FEMA as far as their floodplain rules. So if the operator comes in and says, we're going to go by FEMA's map and not, what are we going to do?
So what I said earlier in my testimony is if a county or municipality has it, and that's why we has officially declared. So one of those 4 would have to have officially declared it via there's city council, there's city manager, county administrators, a state agency. That's why we have in there officially declared. But if one of them has proof of officially declared, then I would say that would win out for saying this piece of land is in the floodplain, and then these rules that the COGCC is putting forward would apply for that location because it's in that piece of land that one of those four has officially declared to be in a 100-year floodplain.
By officially declared, you mean the council or the board has to take action on it as by resolution or something?
That's my intent, that the county board, or the city council, town council, whoever is the governing authority of that municipality or county. That was my intent on writing this. We can provide guidance if that's not clear, but that was the intent.
I'm understanding you to say that the staff that reviews them, since this is an or, A, B, C, or D, that the staff that reviews them is going to go by, if the LGD has input, hasn't officially declared floodplain, that would take precedence over a FEMA declared floodplain.
It absolutely would, and then these rules would apply for that if a city has officially declared it. And I do want to make one point. The OGLAs are not going to necessarily call up the local governments and say, give us your floodplain map, I want to verify it. They're going to depend on LGDs to provide that input and say, no, the operator has said this is not in a floodplain. We feel it is, and here's our officially declared map proving that. And then we, as the OGLA staff and COGCC, can push back on the operator and say, sorry, it's in the floodplain. These rules apply for this location.
So my understanding from your presentation was that if a location was located in a floodplain by any one of these agencies, then according to the COGCC, it's in a floodplain. It only has to be in one of the four, and then it's a floodplain based on our interpretation.
Absolutely. It is in a floodplain, and these apply. One of the four.
I can see another way that it would come before you, too. If there was a disagreement and the local government designee objected to the characterization by the staff, it would end up with the hearing in front of you to sort it out.
My concern is that we're laying more responsibilities off on the LGD. I mean, if there was a way that we could have an overlay on our GIS system so that when a 2A did come in, you could punch it in real quick and say, yeah, you're at least within FEMA's floodplain.
How easy it would be, or could we do it?
So, maybe I can ask Commissioner Holton a question. So FEMA declares floodplains, and then local governments, do they adopt that floodplain? Do they say this is where it applies in our? What's the process at the local government?
We had to adopt the state, which came down in January 1 of 2014, and they were over and above FEMA. But somebody's got to have a map somewhere, some kind of an overlay that you can put on the GIS systems.
And I don't think getting an overlay on the GIS system is a problem. It may take a little time, but we can get shape files and we can put that in there. I guess I was under the impression that counties sometimes move more quickly than FEMA. And using guidance that I guess I don't know, and that's why I'm asking you, as Mr. Coleman has said, make some official declaration through their county commissioners or city council that this is a floodplain for purposes of the city's or county's land use. And then I think our intent was to honor that if that's...
Well, and some of it probably will have to be on the LGDs because they've got LOMARs and CLOMARs where they've changed it, the mapping. Especially around gravel pits and some of those things. But I just hate to put too much more responsibility on the LGD when we're trying to get them engaged as it is.
Right. Well, again, I think, as Mr. Coleman said, the onus is primarily on the operator to figure out where they're putting their location, what the applicable floodplain is. But again, I think at least as to FEMA, and if there's a state too, we easily can put the state on our map.
We've already had discussions with our GIS team for definitely FEMA, and we can further that conversation with definitely the state. Those seem to be two easy ones to have an overlay. As far as the counties and municipalities, some don't even have them mapped as far as GIS layers. But we can surely, via our LGLs, reach out to the LGDs in those areas and try to find out if they have them mapped, and if they do, get copies of them and have overlays in our GIS system. We surely can do that. But some don't have them mapped, is some of the comments that we've seen and heard.
Yeah,
Or you hear comments, I guess.
Yeah, FEMA's a 1 foot freeboard, and the state went to half of that, 6 inch. So I don't know if they've got an overlay or not.
Is there an opportunity instead of a problem here? Is there a way for this, for meaningful engagement of those municipalities and local governments, counties who want to say, hey, we have something other than the FEMA map, to make that known to the commission and participate in these decisions?
I think we can make an avenue for that, especially through our LGL program. I think we definitely could do something like that.
Well, and I guess I'd like to suggest that, again, if that process has taken place and they can provide us a shape file, that can be in our GIS too.
I mean, this
Ask
is
the OIT for another
officially
server.
declared. It's, I mean,
Right.
it's almost, where whatever's the more protective or the more stringent or something. I mean, it's the base case is probably the FEMA map. It sounds like Commissioner Holton, who would know these things from his service as a mayor. So, the state has adopted what might be deemed a more protective or a more stringent map, and then it's possible some local governments have even gone beyond that.
And again, I think that was essentially the intention, that we would honor those local government decisions and official processes, not, oh, that looks like it might flood, let's put that in there.
Right, right.
That was my concern.
I guess I would agree with Commissioner Spillman that I think one thing we learned from the Governor's Task Force is that local jurisdiction want to be more involved. Seems like a great opportunity for them to be more involved and to encourage them and to facilitate that.
I agree with that, and I think that there's likely going to be a time lag between when a local government creates some new mapping and before we would find out about it. That they might provide it to us and we put it into our GIS, and so that having, ensuring that LGDs know that that's one of the important contributions they need to be making as these permits come by them, to evaluate that, assuming that it might not have made it to the state level yet.
Well, I know municipalities are supposed to be turning in their annexations to the Oil and Gas Commission, and maybe they could do the same thing if they've got mapping available. I know Welda's got quite a bit of mapping, but maybe that's something else that the LGDs could be turning in as well.
I'm sorry, but I was just going to say, my one concern, I guess, in figuring out how to avail everybody of this opportunity is, I guess if I were anybody in the regulatory process, I'd want to know which is the map, right? So if I'm an operator, if I'm a concerned citizen, if I'm your staff director, which is the map? So we probably need something in this definition that says something.
I can't type that.
Any area that has, that a municipality, the county, or the state, the feds have declared to be whichever is most, protective of water resources.
Expansive.
Yeah. Commissioner King?
With expansive?
Expansive, right. Something that just would give some certainty to somebody who wants to know which map controls if there's a local, state, and a federal map. That's enough.
Commissioners, I was just educated by Ms. Stanzik, who's over our GIS people. A lot of times with the annexations, we get PDFs of the new land. So in this case, even if the counties or the municipalities have a PDF of anything officially declared, we can build a GIS layer ourselves. So they don't necessarily have to have a GIS. So I've just been educated a little bit.
Something in there?
Mr.
We're at a, sorry, go ahead.
I want to get clarification.
I was going to respond to Mr. Spielman. I wanted to recruit him for our drafting committee, but maybe we could we say?
There was a comment about blood sugar levels before. Has anybody seen that Snickers commercial?
And not going anywhere for a while, Commissioner?
No, would they turn into somebody else?
I'm thinking we could add either a sentence or a clause to the end of the floodplain definition as it exists. A federal agency has officially declared to be in the 100-year floodplain. Well, I was going to try to incorporate the idea of most expansive. You know, if there's a conflict, the most expansive wins.
Matt?
Most recently adopted.
See that?
Yeah, I don't think it belongs at the very end there.
Try to make sure it says expansive and not expensive.
That's what I thought it said.
There?
Any area of land covers it.
I think so too. Yeah.
Any?
Yeah. You already have it.
If it's been adopted, I guess.
Yeah. By legislative action.
Well.
Yeah, and he does talk.
Either. Maybe we number them. Is it a one Colorado municipality, two?
I think expansive was the closest to the concept I threw out there in terms of geographic scope to protect water resources.
Commissioner Holton, when you have these different types of maps defining the floodplain, and you have to have insurance, let's say if you're living within a floodplain, is that just based upon the FEMA map, or is that based upon the county map? Who defines?
The FEMA map is the bare minimum.
The FEMA map is the bare minimum.
And you get points if you make it more restrictive. It's my understanding. I don't know that in our attempt to make it more clear, if we haven't made it less clear.
So, Mr. Chair, I'm not completely there, but I think, as it was pointed out, since it says any area of land, the rule as written is clear and precise, and that if necessary, it might be that within the statement of basis and purpose, it could be clarified as to how the decision will be made. But I think that it may be in there. I'm not able to read and talk at the same time.
You know, we're in a definitions section. I mean, that's the point of this is to provide clarity. I don't think we should refer to a statement of basis of purpose. If we're going to define it, we need to do it here, I think.
I agree with Andy. I think it should say most recently adopted, because it may not be expansive, because if somebody comes in and does a different study, it might pull some property out of the floodplain.
So, under advice of my attorney, he suggested that I'm just going to read the beginning. Floodplain shall mean any area of land that any Colorado municipality, etc. So just add 2 letters. to that. So instead of a municipality, just any. That's my attorney's advice, and I paid dearly for it.
You always do.
That gets us to the most expansive by definition, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
I'm happy with it. I don't know if,
I think it works.
Okay, I have a,
so now, Commissioner, go
I'm
ahead.
struggling, okay? And the one that I'm struggling with has to do with the steel berms, particularly on low-volume producers. I do totally understand that the tanks would be the issue, but I'm wondering that if these tanks are sufficiently anchored, really, is the frequency of the possibility of undercutting that great to place? I mean, do we really have to place that burden on low-volume producers? Are we really increasing the risk that much? Because on the newer wells, we're going to handle it, and eventually it will catch up with us. We're going to make sure we have a program in place. I agree with the anchoring, but and I agree with the pits. But really, with this issue with the steel ring reinforced berms, is that really something that needs to be done for low volume producers? That's going to be the most expensive item, I think. I'm just not sure about the risk of undercutting. I agree with pits, I agree with anchors. I certainly agree with having a risk-based plan of how this is going to be managed.
And just so I'm clear, your comments are directed solely to retrofitting existing locations.
That's correct. Okay. New wells are a different animal.
Well,
I'm
don't
not
put the
convinced.
microphone back up without responding, please.
I think I've said all that I want to say and probably am qualified to say on this issue. I think it's in your court. You have heard from a variety of stakeholders. These are all legitimate issues.
We had tanks float away and separating. I remember the picture of were those, preponderance, were those stripper wells? Were those associated with stripper wells?
I have no idea as I sit here.
Okay.
Whose tanks. Again, it truly wasn't tanks floating away as much as it was tanks and separators and other things being damaged, which led to some spills in some cases, which cost operators a lot of money to replace, which led to plugging and abandoning of many, many wells, because the math was it would be cheaper to plug and abandon than replace the damaged equipment. There was a good deal of undercutting, and the undercutting was substantially more severe at places that did not have steel berms. So that was the math for us. There was, I think, fair to say, in the stakeholder process, a lot of conversation about what should be required to be retrofit. And maybe Mr. Coleman has some additional thoughts as to the steel berm requirement in particular.
So I was texting my wife telling her to please pick up the kids. Can you repeat what she just said on that so I get the whole thing? Honesty is a virtue.
The puts and takes on applying the steel berm requirement to retrofitting equipment. I know there was back and forth in the stakeholder process about which of these requirements should be retroactive. or retro required.
Yeah, I mean, getting back to some of the things I said in the presentation, our analysis was, again, we use that test as could human interventions significantly make a difference, and with the steel berms or equivalent, and I'm understanding the equivalent's important here, and we have put it in the rule, and I know we clarified a little bit of it. That was our test, and we as staff felt that this was an important one to have some type of protection for debris, and I'm definitely getting to Commissioner Holton's, I understand your point, it was for the protection of the debris. So we felt that something needed to be there because human intervention was not going to be able to make a difference in that 1 or 2 days. So we have talked with so a lot of the industry and the technical committee of COGA. I know in general they, especially for new locations, they don't have issues with it. I understand the retrofit, but that was a test that we use as staff to make that determination. Understanding there's other alternatives in a steel rim berm, and that's why we put it up there, but that was why we said that needs to be a retrofit, and it was such an important lesson learned in that report. I mean, it was in that report several times.
Commissioner Craig has suggested,
I've asked.
Commissioner Craig is wondering if in fact the steel berms would add that much additional protection to these low stripper wells. Is there any support, or can anybody help her in her wondering? W-O-N-D and W-A.
Both.
I think the language gives them options, doesn't it?
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. Any other comments?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, if I may.
Commissioner Spielman?
Thank you. I want to go back to the definition of floodplain again. I'm sorry, but I mean, it goes to what this does is it tells us if a given well is in or out of this set of regulations. And I think I'm obviously striving for this opportunity to further involve local decision makers and their mapping. I would want to. I'm concerned any might not give us certainty, and I would hate to see a situation where somebody shows up with one map and we're relying on another map, and they're in or they're out of the floodplain. And whether it's Commissioner Holton's temporal idea of the most recent, or Commissioner King's expansive language, I just think any still leaves the door open for competing maps, and therefore competing interpretations of whether these regulations even apply to a given well.
So do you want the maps, the largest area, as the maps are sitting on top of one another? The most recently adopted, I don't know what you want.
I just want there to be, for everybody's sake, a map.
And I think one question I have, since I don't know the process of this, do areas get taken out of the floodplain? So
it can't be expansive. It's got to be the most recently adopted.
I mean, and so there's that, and then it's just, since there's some delay, I mean, but what if, if this local government takes something out of a floodplain, does that mean that FEMA will follow suit? They will?
Well, you've got to go through the process.
But they don't necessarily argue and say they disagree and they trump.
Yeah, because you've got to have it engineered. You go back through a study.
Right, it works both ways. You could see a local government that's more, I don't know, prescriptive, protective, whatever word you want, has a different map than the federal or state maps. And if we're trying to, that type of flexibility comes at the cost of, some uncertainty at this point. But do we want a regulatory regime that better incorporates opportunities for local governments to define the floodplains or not?
At the point the county has done the study, the state agency has done the study, and they want this to be their official record, does submission official submission to FEMA, is that sufficient?
I'm sorry, Commissioner Craig, I don't know this regime. We had people testify to it. I'm deferring to Commissioner Holton, who certainly knows more than I do about this.
Okay, let me suggest for your consideration to delete the word officially and insert most recently declared.
Federal agency.
We need it to be official, though, don't we?
I would say adopted. Adopted means you have to do it by resolution.
I've been thrown off the drafting committee, so I.
No, you're on. I want you on it. It's just got to say something about something.
I'm just throwing out a concept. If people don't see value in it, we can move on.
I think it's important so everybody knows.
And what happens if FEMA comes back and denies the proposal submitted by the state or county?
Right, it's been officially adopted by the state or the county, but FEMA doesn't recognize it.
FEMA rejected it for whatever reason. Maybe they don't agree with the modeling that's been done.
My judgment is that would not impact this commission or the UGLAs reviewing the forms. That would be a county problem if they want to keep their insurance premiums low.
Director Lepore, you should jump in because I think the chairman's absolutely right, and I'm struggling to make this easier for you and your staff to administer. So
Sure.
Defer to you.
So I confess to being slightly distracted too, but I was looking at most recently, and here's my concern. This has to take place in a moment of time, and that moment of time is when the Form 2A is submitted to us. That language suggests to me some ongoing requirement that it's updated and it applies, you know, even if you submitted your form in 2015 and got updated in 2016, that makes me uncomfortable.
Most recently adopted at the time of submittal. That way they can't go back and change the map after it's been submitted.
Just wait, current at the time of submittal, I don't know.
I guess my sense is we leave it the way it is, currently worded. And so if the company requesting the permit tells you that it's in a floodplain, it's in a floodplain as defined by the FEMA, and then the county has the opportunity to look at that permit, and they said, no, that's not right. It's in, you know, we have an up-to-date official floodplain approved by the county commissioners. Then the staff has to get those two folks together and work that out.
So as it is, did that include Mr. Matter's suggestion that any appear twice?
What's ambivalent mean?
Means you don't give a rat's backside.
I think it's fine to have any in there. I don't have a problem with that. But I don't think we need all the most recently adopted at the time of submittal.
Commissioner Spielman, I deeply respect your language analysis. So any and any, can you tell me one more time?
I don't know that we need the second any. I think probably going back to the way it was gets us to the same place the chairman's speaking of now.
My judgment is we are trying very hard to get counties, municipalities involved in the process.
All right, let me see if this makes any...
What we can do to encourage that, I think, is a good thing. And they want to be involved. They've said they did. They do.
What can I try this for me, who's Mr. Farron? Floodplain shall mean any area of land officially declared to be in a 100-year floodplain by any Colorado. I mean, it just changes the order of the words, but maybe it makes it clearer.
I have just, it's a minor suggestion, but I think we should say by the local municipality, Colorado County, state agency, or federal agency. Because we're not going to be looking at anyone but the municipality that it's in or the county that it's in. I don't think.
Well, I think that's true, but I mean, I think the presumption is the location has to be in one of them. It can't be in more than one.
Yeah, I think it's implied in the. Okay, you have the Lepore language suggested. Anybody have? That's good. Is there consensus? I'm not even asking majority opinion. Just
I would, Mr. Chair, with your permission, I would offer as a friendly amendment to the motion on the table that this language be added.
Okay, I'm a little confused. Jill, help me out. We never voted on the amendment.
No, we didn't have a first.
The first
We have a
place.
first amendment.
So whoever made that amendment,
Let them speak to it.
they
can accept it
the
or not.
friendly amendment. Made that.
Was that Commissioner
I don't
Holton?
think there was an official amendment.
And we'll just entertain a motion to amend.
Well, there's 2 or 3 different, do we want to add everything
Yeah, we would want everything in an
just to
amendment.
adopt it with these amendments? So moved.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second to adopt the proposed rules as amended. Yeah, so we don't have, that's good. It's one motion, we can vote on.
Now, do they need discussion?
Is it? Now, is there any discussion on that?
Thank you. There we go.
Mr. Chairman, I would just note that I think the changes we've made have captured testimony we heard from both Weld County representatives and Boulder County representatives.
Sure, that appears in the proceedings.
And to keep it clean, I guess I will withdraw my initial motion that was without all those amendments.
That's what I was worried about. Thank you, I appreciate that. Absolutely. And the seconder would certainly cooperate and withdraw their second.
The seconder's over here, and yes,
Okay.
he will.
Thank you very much. Any further discussion? Hearing none. Those in favor of adopting the proposed
We just see all the language.
rules as amended indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, same sign. Motion carries. They are adopted.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you all for your
5 p.m.
rapt attention and participation. I think, can we just,
One question for tomorrow.
Yes.
If the will source
let me hit delete.
hearing in the morning goes early, or finishes early, will we just wait until 1 for Encana, or should Encana expect to move up early?
Well, the witnesses for Encana and KPK are scheduled to come in the afternoon, so we'll have to wait. But I can assure you that will source will not end early.
All right, good to know.
okay, we're recessed until 9 o'clock.